The value of things is in the mind of the individuals concerned. My name is Eamonn Butler, and I'm director of the Adam Smith Institute, and I'm author of a new book on schools of economic thought. Well, they all have in common that they're interested in how are resources, useful things, created, and how are they distributed between different people. That is what unites them all. But they see that in many different ways, that it may be that some people believe that should be done by the government. Some people believe it should be done solely by free markets. So they have different approaches to delivering the same outcome, which is how do we optimize our resource creation and our resource use? Pre-classical economics. In the ancient world, many people tried to work out what the value of things was and how that was determined, and how markets actually worked. But there was no overall comprehensive theory about how economics operated. The pre-classical economists, the economists of the ancient world, their big thing was to work out what value was all about, what makes one thing valuable and another thing not valuable at all. And they struggled with this, and many of them thought that what made something valuable was the amount of effort put into its creation. But then if you spend a lot of time making something that nobody wants, it's not really valuable. So these ideas actually went through from there to the classical economists, who never really quite solved that problem. They knew that there was something wrong with it, but they couldn't quite work out what it was that created value instead. And it would really be right up to the 19th century before anybody, in this case the Austrian School of Economics, before anybody came up with a convincing theory about what makes something valuable and what makes it worthless. The classical school. Adam Smith wasn't the first economist. Other people had thought about economics before him. But he was by far the greatest economist because he made economics into a comprehensive science, a modern-looking comprehensive science. And he believed that the important things were self-interest and exchange and markets. The classical economists challenged the theories of the day. The theories of the day was that a country got rich by stockpiling gold and silver, which meant that you didn't buy things from abroad because you'd have to pay gold and silver for them. So you would subsidize your products and try to sell your products abroad in order to get gold and silver coming into the country. And Adam Smith in particular said that's not how the wealth of a nation is created. The wealth of a nation is the productive capacity of its people. It's their ability to create things and to trade things, exchange things. And in that exchange, like children swapping toys in a playground, both parties find themselves better off. They've got something they want, and they've given up something that they didn't want so much. So Adam Smith thought that was the way that you generated wealth, not simply by stockpiling gold and silver. Karl Marx. Karl Marx took the ancient view that the value of something was the labour you put into it. So he saw labour as all important. And he thought that capitalists who owned factories and the machines and so on that the labourers used, that they were somehow cheating and getting value from the workers. So he proposed instead that the workers should unite and get together, and that they should decide how things are made and what is made, rather than business people and capitalists. Marx was an aberration because people had already realized that this idea that the value of something was the labor that you put into it, it was already being questioned. And some people had come up with alternative theory. Here he found Marx recycling this theory and making it not just an economic view, but building it into an entire political system built round labour, built round the workers. So he really was completely out of date. And it's very curious that he was much ignored in his time in the late 19th century. And it was really only when the Russian Revolution occurred that people started talking about Marx and citing Marx in journals and books and things, because he was seen as providing some intellectual background for the Russian Revolution. But most serious economists had given up on him long before, or had simply ignored him because they thought this person is wildly out of date. Capitalism didn't collapse, firstly because it innovated, and secondly because it did actually raise living standards, that people were better off. And also, of course, capitalists, it wasn't a fight between capitalists and workers, that capitalists realized that they need workers. Workers realized they needed tools and factories, otherwise they couldn't produce things. So enlightened capitalists like Henry Ford, for example, the motor manufacturer, unilaterally raised wages. Marx had said that wages would be bid down and down and down until they'd get to subsistence levels. But no, he raised wages well above subsistence levels. And as a result, he got higher productivity. Fewer people dropping out of the workforce, less turnover in his workforce, and therefore both sides benefited. He made more money, but so did the workers, and then the workers could actually afford his products. They could afford cars. So Marx never saw that coming. I think Marxists have a united view that the relationships between individuals are highly dependent upon the means of production. If you have an agricultural economy, you probably have a sort of feudal relationship where there's a local head person who runs everything and everybody else is subservient to them. If you have a trading economy, well, that's a more open system. If you have a manufacturing economy, then it's going to be, some people are going to have wealth and power because they have capital, and other people aren't going to have wealth and power. So I think the thing which really does unite them is this materialism that human relations depend very much on the economic system. The Austrian School. The Austrian School believe that the important thing in economics is individual action. How do people make choices? And they say that is subjective, that it's very much what's in their mind. It's not something that's necessarily rational, but it's in their mind. And the important thing then is to understand how the human mind works and how we value different things. And the Austrians were very critical of government intervention in the economy. That they believed the important thing to make the economy run smoothly was to allow people to make their own choices. And that would increase value because people would do whatever they thought was going to increase their own value. And if we all do that, then we increase value for the whole society. But when you get government involved, then it's really a few people who are deciding what should happen. And a few people might decide, well, we have to stop people doing one thing or another, so we're going to put a tax on it. And then you're actually reducing value by these interventions. Or the government might decide that it needs to, that we should support some industry. Well, it's got to take money from other people in order to subsidize that industry. So that means that some people are losing value, they're losing resources, they can't make the economic decisions they would. So if the Austrians' view is that if government got out of the way, we'd be in a much better economic position. The Austrians point out that the information you need to plan an economy centrally, as a government might want to do, is not really very solid information. It's information which is in the minds of millions, indeed billions today, of individuals. And sometimes that information is dependent on their circumstances. It's dependent on how they view different things, their ambitions, their family life, and so on and so on. And it changes all the time. You can't possibly collect the information. Hayek, for example, takes the example of an estate agent, somebody who buys and sells houses, and says that person has to know the state of the local housing market, not just from year to year or from quarter to quarter, but from day to day. And by the time such a person had sent the information up to some number cruncher in the central government, and that government had decided what to do about that information, and then had decided how to act on it, and then had sent the information back again to the local market, it would be wildly out of date. So the Austrians feel that central planning is just a complete mistake, because you simply can't get all the information you need to plan rationally. In the 1920s, an Austrian economist, Ludwig von Mises, published a book on socialism, and he pointed out that under the Marxist ideal, you don't have markets at all. You don't have prices. Goods are allocated centrally. And Mises pointed out that without prices, you don't know where to put your resources, because when things are in short supply and when things are desired by a lot of people, then the price tends to go up. And when it's not really needed, the price tends to go down. So if you don't have this information, you don't really know what is needed and where it's needed and who needs it. And therefore, you can't possibly make a rational allocation of resources between people from the centre. You just don't have the information you need. What unites the Austrian school is their subjectivism. In other words, that the value of things is in the mind of the individuals concerned, how things relate to them. And it's something that you can't put in numbers, you can't do in mathematics, you can't put it into a computer and number crunch it and get a better economy out as a result. You simply have to let people go with their own valuation of things, and then you will get prosperity. The Austrians predicted that the Soviet system would collapse because it didn't have the information to allocate resources centrally from the government. And in the event, yes, that's exactly what happened. It took a long time because the Soviet regime in particular was quite brutal about keeping the Marxist idea floating. But it happened. Keynes and the Keynesians. John Maynard Keynes was a British economist, came to prominence in the 1920s and through to the 1940s. And his view was that the big picture, the macroeconomy, as he called it, was the thing that you should focus on, and that the government had a big role in determining how that came out. Keynes offered a picture of how the whole economy worked that you could sum up in a few equations and a few graphs. And that was a very powerful tool, because it made economics look as if it was a science like physics. And that was very attractive to a large number of people. And when the Second World War happened, there was an effort to rebuild the economies of Western Europe in particular. And Keynes was seen as having the answer, because here he had this scientific idea of how to run the whole of the economy. And so that led to a number of policies which in the end didn't turn out very well. And it attracted a lot of economists and a lot of institutions to Keynesian thinking. Keynes believed that if an economy was in depression, that the government could do something about that by reducing taxation, so there was more money in people's pockets, and spending more. So it might have to borrow to do that, but to spend more on public projects. And if the economy was booming, then it would have to do the opposite. So Keynes felt that you could scientifically manage an economy. You could smooth the ups and downs in an economy, and that was very attractive to all economists. The Chicago School. One of the big things in the so-called Chicago School is monetarism. That one of the most important factors in the economy is how much money the government is producing. So that's the first strand. And the second strand is that almost anything you can think of, family life, crime, work, all of these things have an economic background. Monetarism is an old and very simple idea, which is that if the government prints too much money, then you will get inflation. It's like everything else. If you've got a large quantity of something, you don't value it as much. And the same is true of money. If the government prints more and more dollar bills, pound notes, yen, whatever it is, people will value them less. They will buy less. In other words, they'll feel that prices are going up. That's monetarism. I think what unites the Chicago School is their view that so many things have an economic side to them, that whether you decide to get married, whether you decide to have children, whether you decide to educate yourself or get some training, some extra skills, all of these things have an economic dimension. Even whether you commit a crime has an economic dimension. And that means that you can produce policies that are based on that and hopefully for the better. Marginalism and the neoclassical synthesis. The neoclassical school built on the classical scholars, but they thought that the classical scholars hadn't really fully understood the problem. That the classical scholars thought that the economy would automatically stabilize itself, and the neoclassical school thought that wouldn't actually be the case. So their view was that the classical school oversimplified things. The neoclassical school proved very attractive to many economists, and it still does, because the neoclassicals actually took the Austrian subjective theories and the Austrian marginal value theories, but they also took on a more scientific sort of way of looking at economics. So this was, really very attractive. That on the one hand, yes, you understand all the stuff about how human beings make decisions, but on the other hand, you can put all of that into some numbers and get some answers out of the computer, and then you can run the economy. The public choice school. Public choice economics uses the tools of economics, economic theory, in order to criticize government action. The public choice school makes us skeptical about the merits of government. Politicians are not angels. They've got their own interests. And so things might not actually be done rationally by government. And once you're aware of that, then you might think, we should actually leave more things to individual actions and individual decisions and have the government do a lot less. So in policy terms, it's extremely important. Behavioural economics. Behavioural economics is the idea that we are, as human beings, subject to a number of biases in how we think. And because of that, we don't make rational decisions. And that it is possible to nudge us into making rational decisions by changing the choices that we face. There was an important book called Nudge, and the thesis of that book was that human beings are not rational. They make choices that are bad for them. And therefore, that we should look at what they call the architecture of the choice. And if you can actually change that architecture, then people might make different choices that are more rational, that produce more value, that create a better economy, and that produce a happier population. Studying schools of thought is actually quite important because you get to understand the historical circumstances that led people to believe that one thing was important or that something else was important. And also, there's no one explanation for the whole of economic life. And by studying schools of thought, you can see the different explanations that people have had, and you can compare them and contrast them, and that you can then maybe come up with your own school of thought, which might do better than everything that we've had before. And you can check out an introduction to schools of economic thought by me, Eamonn Butler.